All right, everyone, welcome back to the West Virginia Outdoor Economy webinar series. I'm really excited to be here with you today. I apologize, my voice is kind of cutting in and out. I'm dealing with some allergies. It is allergy season, everything's starting to bloom, and I was out in the woods all day yesterday, so my apologies there. My name's Corey Lilly. I am the host of the West Virginia Outdoor Economy webinar series, and today we're joined with two subject matter experts from the OEDC team, Logan Chapman and Rich Edwards, which we'll be passing this webinar off to them in just a moment. Before we hop into the details of the webinar content itself, I'm going to give a few updates from the Smith OEDC. For those who are on the call, if you could drop your name, organization, and just a quick little blurb on why you're interested in this specific topic. Um, That'd be really helpful. We at the OEDC deliver programs across the state of West Virginia to empower our partners on the ground to get you the information, connect you with subject matter experts so that you can crush it at your pursuits, at your job, and your passions. We have two departments here at the OEDC that we do this work through. We have our talent attraction and retention side of our operations, and then we have our outdoor economy side, which is where Logan, Rich, and myself work. We have lots of different programs to deliver this type of content. Um, this webinar series being one of them, but we have many others, such as our Trails Training and Education Resource Center. We have a workshop calendar for 2026 that's being built out right now. If you are interested in this type of work, please reach out to us. We have workshops across the state that we come actually in the field. You can hang out with Logan and Rich themselves in the flesh to learn about these building techniques and different design and trail building um, opportunities. So this is just one of our many different programs. We also have our webinar series that you are obviously a part of, but I want to be sure to let you know we have many more coming out in the future. We do them twice a month, um, beginning of the month and end of the month typically, and we're building it out through June right now. So we have a really compelling series of webinars that are being lined up and only more being added. So if you have a specific topic that you'd like to see, please reach out, let us know what you're interested in, and we'll try to pull in a subject matter expert for that specific topic. We also have our outdoor community meetups that we're deploying across the state. We do these multiple times throughout the year. We just had two of them, one of them in the New River Gorge and one of them in Morgantown for the North Central Outdoor Community Meetup. These are really fun in-person social networking events that we highlight projects that are happening on the ground in that community and give some people the stage so that they can talk about what they're up to and things happening on the ground. But we also have tabling organizations that are at these events, and it's a really great place to connect with local orgs, make those connections and networks uh, in your community. If you are interested in hosting one of these, please reach out and let me know if you'd like to have one in your community. It's potential we might be able to do that. So this is another opportunity to bring resources to your town. Our next one is on March 31st in Elkins, and we hope to see you there. It's at 6 p.m. at Big Timber. If you want more information about all of these, I'll be dropping a lot of stuff in the chat so that you'll have links to all of these things. I also just want to bring up the Outdoor Economy Summit. We had our inaugural Outdoor Economy Summit in February. I hope that you all were able to attend. If not, please sign up to our newsletter and we'll be able to keep you in the loop for future outdoor economy summits. We're also building off the momentum of the Outdoor Economy Summit, looking to launch a outdoor business alliance or outdoor industry association, something of the sort. So if you have interest in this, please reach out and spread the word to your local businesses that might want to be a part of this type of alliance. The Send is our newsletter email blast. This is the best source of direct information coming from the OEDC. We also share things through our different programs, but and social media outlets, but this is the best direct source of information. So please sign up to this. I'll drop this link in the chat if you weren't able to get the QR code. but this is the best way to stay up with all things OEDC and West Virginia outdoor economy. So today I'm really excited to have Logan and Rich back for another webinar talking about trail maintenance best practices. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Logan and Rich to introduce themselves and the topic for today.
Hey, Corey, thanks. Really appreciate it. So, folks, today we are going to be talking about trail maintenance. It's kind of the time of year to really dive into that. Um, and are we sharing okay? Cool. Okay. I can only see Corey for some reason.
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
you're good.
Wicked. So yeah, trail maintenance. Now's the time of year, right? We have some time before visitation really jumps up and people are busy interacting with our visitors at our parks. And also now's a really good time to get out there while it's still really wet. We're getting tons of rain. I hear we're supposed to get like 1.5 inches in the state tonight and to tomorrow. Um, and then there's also not all the leaves on the trees yet, so you can see everything that's going on really well before things get covered up. So just as a little bit of a primer for folks, I want to make it very clear that everything we're talking about is for our sustainable trails. And a sustainable trail or a resilient trail has to satisfy these three requirements: your environmental, social, and economic needs. Um, so environmental, this is a trail that's not eroding and washing sediment into our stream beds. Socially, this can carry the amount of visitors you're going to need, and it meets the wants and needs of the visitors and keeps everybody happy on the trail. And then economically, this is the trail that, if you only have a Camry budget to maintain it, you shouldn't go out and buy the trail that has a budget like a Porsche to maintain. And the easiest way to do this is with what we call the contour trail. This is a trail that follows the contour lines, much like a topographic map. And by that, we mean it is running, the trail runs perpendicular to the hillside. That prevents erosion. It allows what we call sheet flow, water to move across the trail rather than down the trail. We've all probably seen the hiking trail that looks very much like a gully or a dry creek bed. Taking an alignment like this prevents that and helps keep everybody happy, prevents that erosion, and it's not a lot of money to maintain. So, maintenance. There's I call it like 3.5 things to be aware of. I know I have four here on the list. You gotta have eyes on it, right? Make sure you know what the current conditions are. You have to keep your corridor clear, cut those limbs back. Sometimes you're going to need to repair your tread and you need to maintain positive drainage. Okay. So right off the bat, let's jump into talking about our assessment. So lots of different ways to go about this, but it's hard to have a good maintenance plan if you don't know what's going on the trails and you don't have an idea of what's going on out there yourself. So this is a great way to get out of the office, get away from the computer, and go out and spend some time on your trails. Start a logbook. This can be either just a notebook that you keep in your pocket, or you can do a spreadsheet and do it digitally on your phone or a tablet, whatever it may be. Really great way just to take note of that. Hey, I walked this trail on this date and everything seemed good to go. So that way, whenever you get anything reported from visitors, you have an idea of when it was last seen by a land manager. Another
Wonderful.
thing, speaking of the visitors, if you have a strong volunteer cadre, encourage those people to let you know what they see on the trails. Give them your phone number if you're comfortable with that. Give them your email or have them just pop in, come find you and say, "Hey, I found this tree down," or "Hey, this like we're starting to see some erosion on this little downhill section," whatever it may be. Use those folks. But the most important thing is make sure that you are documenting this because you might be able to remember it, but what about your volunteers that are going to help you or other people on staff that are going to help do the maintenance in the future? Make sure it's documented so everybody's on the same page. In the similar vein of user reporting, we just a couple weeks ago had Willie Jacobs from Trailforks do a presentation. So if you want to do a deeper dive on that, check that out. It's on the OEDC's YouTube page. But Trailforks is a free app, has mapping, very similar to Strava. Like you can track your activities and but what's really great about this is there's a reporting feature. So the users can go in and say, oh, there's a tree down on this trail, found it, upload a photo of it. And the photos are really great because it gives you a sense of scale, for one. as the land manager, you need to encourage folks to put something in there. Like in this photo, it's a bike. Maybe it's a hat, a helmet, a backpack, a more standard sized water bottle, like your Nalgene's are all about 1 liter, right? Encourage them to put something like that in the photo. So that way, I, as a land manager, don't go out with my giant, super heavy chainsaw for a project that I could probably tackle with just a silky handsaw, right? And then the other cool thing is you can see right in here, it's geolocated. It drops a pin where the problem area was tagged. So that prevents the issue that you all have probably ran into. I know I used to see it whenever I was working as a ranger. Someone like, yeah, there's this problem. Like it's only, I don't know, a quarter mile out on the trail. And then we go out with the saw and I'm walking and a quarter mile turns into a mile and a half before I ever find the issue. This tells you exactly where it is and you're not reliant on those descriptions. Okay, we're going to move away from the assessment and monitoring a little bit, and let's talk about visitor conflict, some issues that happen. Maybe you have a new trail system that you're managing, and the first year you had no issues with visitation. Maybe even the first 3 years there were no problems, but suddenly you're getting all these reports of users like, "Oh, this mountain biker was going too fast," or "This trail runner ran me off the trail," and you're just suddenly seeing a high uptick in visitor conflict. More often than not, the cause of this and the solution is maintaining your sightlines. If people are not able to see very far down the trail, especially if these are folks that have headphones that they deafen themselves while they're out on the trail, they're suddenly being thrust into a social environment that they weren't ready for. Maybe someone's out on a hike, they're thinking about the day, solving the world's problems, and then suddenly there's this mountain biker that just appears out of nowhere and is screaming on their brakes. And it's like, it's startling. That is the most common cause of visitor conflict is people can't see other folks coming or going. So I have this chart here that I think illustrates this very, very well. Let's say we'll say I'm a hiker and I'm stopped just getting some water out of my pack. I'm not moving, right? But Rich is riding his mountain bike and he's coming downhill. And from Rich's perspective, he's going pretty slow. He's going 10 miles per hour. But if I can only see him 50 feet down the trail, he will be touching me in 3.5 seconds.
One 1,000, two 1,000, three 1,000. Hello.
Yeah, that is seldom enough time to like get my bearings and be ready to have an interaction with another person. Let's say Rich sees me before I'm aware of him and he slams on the brake and cuts his speed in half. So now, if from his perspective, it feels like he's crawling. He's only going 5 miles per hour. Sure, the approach time has doubled to just about 7 seconds, but for me, as a hiker, from my perspective, that 5 mile per hour pace is effectively a sprinting pace if somebody were running. That's still going to feel very fast. That's why sight lines are so critical because it prevents that surprise, prevents user conflict, and keeps everybody happy on the trail. Just gives them time to react.
And the reason that Logan mentioned that, like the first year it's okay, second year, third year, probably two things are happening. One, your trail's becoming a success. More people are hearing about it, so you got a higher number of visitors out there. Two, your sight lines have grown in. They were cleared really well during construction, and the vegetation's grown in. You get a couple years for free right after a build before you have to worry too much about sight lines. But then stuff will really start to kick in, especially if you had a wet season the year before.
Okay, that's all fine and dandy. Maintain the sight lines, prune things back, right? But you should also do this within your build spec. So we have our trail tread and we also have our trail corridor. An easy way to delineate these two things mentally is think of the trail tread. That's the surface that people walk on or their tires touch or the hooves touch. If you're if you go out to Home Goods and you buy a hallway runner, the trail tread is that runner that you put down your hallway, that nice pretty piece of carpet. And then the corridor is the walls in your hallway itself. So let's say my trail tread is spec to be 36 inches wide. It's 3 feet. But my corridor is going to be double that. Sometimes it's also a little bit more to 8 feet. So that means starting at the center, if it's 8 foot from the center of the tread, I'm going to go out 4 feet on either side to maintain that corridor. Another really important thing that is very easy to neglect, partly because it can be kind of difficult to do the pruning and maintenance here. And also, like if you're just out there on foot, you're not necessarily seeing it all the time, is your trail ceiling. If you are on if you manage a trail system that allows equestrian use, well, these people, their eyeballs are going to be 10 feet in the air. So make sure that you are spending time keeping that trail ceiling as high as it should be. If you do allow equestrians, your ceiling should probably be a 12-foot minimum, probably a little bit higher. What if it doesn't allow equestrians? Well, we have a lot of hikers that come out with the baby backpacks and they have their baby on their shoulder. And so, I'm 6 foot. So if someone my stature were to go out and do that, suddenly I'm 2 feet taller. I'm now 8 feet. Well, if the ceiling isn't that high enough, I'm going to be slamming my baby's head into limbs. Let's not do that.
So remember that your trailing ceiling, your trailing tread, your trailing corridor, all are somewhat contextual. There's some basic guidelines based on modality, but a lot of agencies or that specific trail may have listed those numbers may be listed in that trail description, or it may not be. It's always good to ask for that and see what it is. Because if there is a set of listed specs, you should maintain to it. But if there's not, you just got to go in the basic modality expectations, whether it's hike bike or whether it's hike bike horse. And remember that with bikes, our prism gets wider in turns because we lean over in turns. So your same trail corridor that might be sufficient in a straight line, you might go a little wider in this. And also from the previous slide with the sight lines, oftentimes your sight line clearing, your really critical sight line clearing is happening outside of the trail corridor. If you only do your corridor clearing inside your clearing inside your trail corridor, you're never going to be able to address your sight lines because the solution for this sight line issue is just to the outside edge of that circle. You could clear through there. Also notice that this area has a lot of sunlight hitting the ground. A lot of your sightline issues are caused by a low growing vegetation. Anytime you have a blue canopy in West Virginia or a place where you get enough rain for a forest to grow, and you have sunlight hitting the ground, you're going to have a lot more early successional growth, which is going to block sightlines. So when you clear that vegetation, don't clear what's creating a canopy. Clear a window underneath it, and if there's higher limbs or a sapling growing up, leave the top of that so it can keep reaching for the daylight and creating shade. If you've got a trail in the East Coast that's open to the canopy above, you're going to constantly have pruning issues until you can get a canopy established. The cheapest thing you can do long term to reduce your pruning cost and your maintenance cost is to get a canopy growing over it.
Absolutely. Richard, thank you for that addition. You read my mind. I was going back to it whenever you were. So, whenever you're clearing this, this photo here on the right side of my screen is what you should not do. Do not leave limbs hanging in the air. Do not leave cat claws sticking out at people. Because one, it's unsightly. Like that just doesn't look very great to me. And two, that's a hazard. If you're on a trail that allows cyclists, especially an area where they can carry speed, or even equestrians, you're falling from a height at that point, that's a great risk for impalation or just other pretty nasty injuries from folks landing on exposed, pointy limbs. So, a really easy way to do this is one, get it on the ground. All of your limbs should be touching the ground and not just be hanging up in that tree that you only cut a few limbs off of. Two, whenever they are on the ground, the natural end, so the end that is not cut, drag it 20 feet at least, ideally more, at least 20 feet away from the trail, and then have the natural end pointing back towards the trail. It looks a little bit better, and of course, that's less of a hazard because you don't have these stakes poking back out at folks. And also, whenever it's on the ground, it's going to rot faster than just hanging in the air. Here's another photo of this. This was probably, I don't know for certain, but probably pruned by visitors. Someone just came out, had hand pruners or a little saw in their pack, and just real quick hacked all those little limbs off and they can get through. But this photo was taken at eye level. So that's a great way to poke my eyes out. And I don't know about you all, I like being able to see, and I also like not getting hurt on trails. So again, get them on the ground and don't leave those claws pointing at folks.
Secondly, oftentimes, if you got a crown that comes down, neither of those two pictures represent it. But a lot of times that creates a canopy break. So one, you have all these cat claws right next to the trail tread. Two, it's not uncommon to see them a year later buried in soft ephemeral vegetation and completely invisible, but inches from the side of the trail corridor. So yeah, it's totally fine if someone's just volunteer maintenance going through this, but this is the kind of thing you'd want to pick up on an inspection. And if you were going through with the chainsaw, actually doing corridor clearing here, not to skip this section, but to take the time to go ahead, process this, get it on the ground, get it out of the sticking out of people's faces.
Absolutely. So that's your corridor maintenance in a nutshell. Your pruning, keeping your sight lines and your corridor clear. We're going to transition into the tread maintenance now. And a very common problem that we'll see, especially this time of year whenever it's wet, and so you have a combination of both surface water, so just rainwater running along the ground, and groundwater, so your seeps, just where ground will randomly, or excuse me, water will randomly pop out of the ground and start running down your trail. This is extremely common to see in your grade reversals, the low points on the trail, because water makes it down there. It's going to stay wet a little bit longer than the rest of the tread, and as users come through and compact that soil, it's going to cup it, and then you end up with this smiley shape, which really, as a land manager, will make you frown because you're going to have a trail that's eroding and holding water now. So all you have to do, simple thing, go to that low point, and where this yellow line is in the illustration, just take that berm off. Just cut it down following that imaginary line. So that way the low point is no longer on the trail, but it's off the trail. And what we call that process is by installing a nick. Photo on the left here is just a good example of a puddle, and all you have to do, look at the graphic there, make a nice gentle outslope from that puddle, so that way that low point's no longer there. One thing that's important though is this should not be a ditch. You know, if you're going out with your Pulaski or your Rogue Hoe, or whatever tool of choice you have, it shouldn't be only the width of that tool. This should be at minimum 5 feet, ideally a little bit longer. Um, this shouldn't feel like a speed bump and it shouldn't be a ditch. If it's a ditch, it's going to clog up with leaves, and then you have the same problem all over again. So we want to be very gentle with how we encourage our water to move. Give it a gentle nudge and persuade it rather than trying to boss it around. This is a photo of a nick being installed in real life. You can see here, pretty large, right? That gentleman's working on it. It's probably about as tall as he is. We'll call that 5 to 6 feet. And you can see that he extends all the way up to the edge of the trail tread. By doing that, there's no chance for like a tiny pocket to show up right about here and creates more issues. So just go ahead, make it big from the jump, encourage the water to move slowly and spread out instead of being concentrated. Another note is he is spending some time excavating off the trail. You know, you don't want to dig this low point out and then all of your spoils are just right here creating a dam, because that's going to lead to other issues further down the line. So that's the nick. Nicking is awesome. It's pretty quick and easy to do, and it's something that you can train up volunteers to do very, very quickly. Now, the next step, maybe you have water running down the trail, or there's a grade reversal that should have been in the spot and it didn't make it during construction, or just over time. Sometimes like you just need more if you have a seep that pops up, or there's a new introduction of water on the trail. And what we do to solve that problem is basically a nick plus, and we call it a rolling grade dip. It starts out the same exact way. You're going to excavate your little half bowl here, just like you would for the nick. But then you're going to take your spoils or some other dirt. Really good idea to start with stone if you have stone available, and create a little ramp. So that way you're installing the low point and also giving it a rise. So if the water is coming down with any sort of velocity, it's not going to overcome that nick and go past it, but it'll hit that extra little hump and then come off the trail. Rolling grade dips do take a lot longer than just putting in one nick because of all the time that you spend moving the soil around to create that ramp, maybe harvesting more soil. And then a big thing, if you're doing this with hand tools, the compaction process takes a long time is in order to get it to compact well and prevent a ton of settling, it's going to settle regardless. To prevent a lot of settling, you need to put, an inch, inch and a half of soil down and then go through and compact it as best as you can, and then repeat that process over and over as you're building that ramp. Because if you get 12 inches of soil and you're going through with hand tools to compact that, you're only going to have the top layer compacted. So do it in stages, do it like that, and you're going to have a much better, a greater chance of success whenever you install your rolling grade dip.
Both the rolling grade dip and the nick are long-term solutions where you're creating a new drainage feature. These are for you've identified a place that's lacking in drainage that you need to get water off the trail. So you're doing you're moving dirt to make that happen. There is another maintenance aspect to this. A lot of times these will already be existing. And these features, whether they were built in the trail, whether the grade reversal was through the design of the trail, whether it was a constructed rolling grade dip like this or a nick, these all do need maintenance on a regular basis because we have leaves that come down. So a lot of times leaves will settle in these low spots. And they'll need to be cleaned out. So this is something that's definitely should be on everybody's spring maintenance list. If you have trails that were built on a contour alignment, is going out there and just dragging the leaves out of here. That can be done with a light rake. This is an easy kind of thing to do as you're doing your inspection, or you're walking. You can do maintenance on these, 5 minutes, 3 minutes here. You can clear these out, keep them from holding water. And that means they're going to drain out well. If they're holding water, they're going to be soft. As people ride through them, they're going to displace some dirt. People are going to carry away some dirt in their boots. They're going to get deeper. They're going to get more pocketed. It's going to be harder to maintain them. So doing that light maintenance of getting the winter's leaves out of there, can do a lot. And just, yeah, that's a easy thing for folks to be doing now. And then if you clean out the leaves and you notice it is pocketed, that's something to put onto the maintenance list for the workday, because that's going to require a little more construction work to do. So I just wanted to be clear. You've got that light maintenance that you could probably go through and clean 3 miles of trail in a morning with one person. And then you've got things like the rolling grade dip where you've identified this problem that needs to be done. And this is more like 3 or 4 people for 3 hours building one rolling grade dip, or 8 people if it's a 4 foot wide trail. Wider the trail, the difference between a 2 foot wide bench cut and a 4 foot wide bench cut in the rolling grade dip is 2 to 3 times as much digging.
Yeah, the I just want to reiterate that again. The nicking can be done pretty quickly, but the grade dips take a lot of
And if
time.
you're on a structure, if you have a piece of single track on an old roadbed, unfortunately, you need to consider the roadbed width in terms of your drainage. And if you're on what was effectively a road built by heavy equipment, you should really consider whether you want to tackle that rolling grade dip by hand or if that's more an equipment sized project.
That's a beautiful segue, Rich. Thank you. So this photo is what we would call a trode. It's a trail road. About 50 feet below where Rich stood whenever he took this photo is traditional single track trail. But this is in at the Baker's Ridge Woodlot on WVU Research Forest, and they drive trucks back there, whether it be for timber cruising or for the you can see the maple lines running through here for maple harvesting. And they need to keep that access point there. But what was happening is water was running down this access road and it was creating erosion on the road. But where it was more evident was once it hits that single track trail about 50 feet behind the photo. So this was done with a bulldozer, and all they did was went in, dug out the low point here, and then just pushed the spoils up along here, compacted it real good. The red line is your high point there. So then as water is coming downhill, if you follow those blue arrows, it's going to go into that low point, has reinforcement from the ramp there, and leave the trail. And that has stopped the erosion further downhill from that point.
If your goal is long-term durability with the rolling grade dip, subtlety is really important. This is more subtle than a speed bump on a paved road. The more dramatic they are, the more impact they take, and the more likely they are to fail. However, you definitely, if you're doing more shared use or bike optimized stuff, especially bike optimized, you may build rollers that actually is rolling grade dips that function as rollers or as jump features as well. They can be dual purposed. But if you want to have super long durability, making them as subtle to the visitor as possible will ensure that. So and basically you do that by making the dip really long as whatever wheel or hoof base you has, and then make your rise as long as that as well. You don't want a high center of vehicle on the rise. So, and the same with horses. Horses don't high center, but they do hoof drag. So if your rise is too spiky and a horse can straddle it and the rear hooves will strike the top of it as they go across it, that structure is not going to last as long.
So that's your nick and your rolling grade dip. You're maintaining that positive drainage. Sometimes seeps can appear, or it's a high braking area if you have cyclists, or a turn, or a steep section that horses' hooves are really digging into and creating erosion. What you can do, and it's like even more work than your grade dip or your nick, but it's very effective. Install some rock armor your tread. And I have this list up here. I don't, my head might be blocking it. For armoring, if it's constantly wet, if that's a seep, even if it's a low point, but it's just always holding water and constantly getting deeper and deeper and deeper, that's a great candidate for rock armor. If this is a steep trail, you can have steep trails that won't erode if it's made out of a material, unlike soil, that is going to hold up over time. So rock armor that. And then really important thing for your trails that allow cyclists, whether it's cyclists only or it's bike optimized, anywhere there is hard braking, there is turning at speed, or landing areas where you're getting compression forces, these are all excellent spots to rock armor. It's not just for water. And we look at armoring in two ways. One is pitching, the other is flagstones. We'll talk about the pitching first. This is really handy because you don't need a lot of very large rock. In the state, we're blessed with rock, right? But oftentimes they're a bit smaller, or it's just hard to move, those giant 500-pound rocks around, or they might be more round than we need them to be. So pitching is great because you can use smaller, like book or 2 book sized rocks, and you put them in the ground long ways, much like you were placing books on a bookshelf, except your bookshelf in this case is laying on the ground. Your pitching also allows water to flow between all those cracks in the rocks that show up here, which is great because it's not going to get slippery over time from water running on top. It also acts as a bit of a filter. So as water comes through here, it'll drop sediment as it moves through those rocks. So you're not dumping sediment into your trout streams. And I have a photo that shows this in just a moment. Because the water is flowing through the cracks in the rocks, there can be water moving, and that the tops of those are going to stay dry in some cases. Here are 2 photos from Wissahickon Valley Park in Pennsylvania, a really large project. You can see all the stones they used to make this. This was a lot of work. You can see as they're going through, placing the stones vertically, and they start in the middle and they work out. You can approach this many different ways, but the important thing, and I'm sorry, I neglected to mention it, is having those anchor stones that are going to keep everything together. Any rock armoring you do, the stones should not move when you're done. And then here's a photo of, you can see there's a lot of water running through this armor here, some surface water, but the tops of some of these rocks are still dry. Really, really cool. Another thing that's great about pitching is if you're in an area in which people are less accepting of rocks and really rough terrain, is pitched sections of armoring can be capped with soil. So that way, water's still flowing beneath. People will never even know the rocks are there. So that's your pitching.
Not unlikely the rocks might get exposed over time,
Right.
but we find people are much more tolerant of a little bit of rock showing up through, if they're rock adverse, a little bit of rock showing up through time through dirt gives them time to adapt to it, especially the regular users. And there's a static or visually a big difference between a few rocks sticking up through dirt and a whole panel of jagged rocks staring up at people. If they're used to riding on dirt, a little rock in it's much more acceptable.
And then the other method that you'll often see is flagstoning. This is very, very similar to a flagstone paved patio that you might see. Instead of the rocks going in long ways onto the ground, you're going to lay them nice and flat. The thing with flagstoning, though, is you need to use much, much, much larger stones. These should take, at minimum, call it a two-person rock. It'll take two people to lift it by hand to get it into place. That's just a good way to make sure that this is a rock that's not going to shift around over time. You need that mass there because one, you're going to excavate it into the soil and set it into the ground, but that added mass just prevents it from moving over time and shifting. Here's a photo from down south, Standing Board Trails down in Georgia, and you can see that red clay dirt. And we know clay holds a lot of water. It takes a long time to dry. So put your flagstone up on these trails, and these are, very clearly mountain bike trails with berms, and it protects that tread so people can still come out and ride after a rain event and they're not rutting out and destroying the trail. Here are two photos from Kakaban State Park. And what I like here is the photo on the left. You can see it's slightly more smooth, less bumpy, lower rugosity, um, which might be a little more approachable for folks. But then on the right side here, it's rougher. There's bigger dips and bumps between all the rocks. And I think that's really important to point out because what we talk about armoring often as a way to prevent erosion, but it's also a great tool to add a little flavor to the trail. We call it a technical trail feature. So you can choose to make it more bumpy and rough for the challenge of it, or make it smoother and you're just protecting from erosion. Now, something we see a lot in West Virginia, and again, largely just due to the stones we have a lot of these smaller rocks, is you can use flagged anchors. They don't all have to be pitched like the illustrations here show. It's totally okay to go in and have a flagstone as an anchor instead of a big pitch stone. And that is what we did a couple years ago on a project at Stonewall. We had just a few large boulders here on either side, and these ones they're capped with dirt. So we used those as our anchors, placed those, and then did our pitching in between. And it's really great. That also is an easy way to extend your ramp, the entrance and exit of your pitched area, just by using Biz Flagstone. A little bit less material, a little bit less time if you can get those big stones in there.
We used this technique last Saturday up above Corridor H, the National Forest, and we probably had a 3 gallon a minute to 5 gallon a minute flow going through there by the end. Um, had hit two seeps and yeah, 8 inches wide of pitching with flagstones on both sides. All of that flow was going through the pitching underneath the trail tread. Um, Eventually we may have some of that, and it's definitely you want to consider that potentially turn into surface flow over time. But most of our anytime we have surface flow, we also have more groundwater flow underneath that same location. So the pitching will a lot of times most of your flow will stay in the ground at that point, and that's better. We're keeping that benthic habitat right there underneath the trail tread. So yeah, the pitching and the flagstone combo seems to work really well for the constant seeps we're going to see in West Virginia. A brief note about seeps. You never, and this is just with trail maintenance, we never have enough resources to do all the maintenance we want to do. So we're constantly prioritizing and making judgment calls about what do we really have to fix this season and what can we avoid fixing. And so with your seeps, when you go out and do your inspections this time of year, your water table is probably going to be highest right now. As the sap starts to pull and the trees start to bud, your water table is going to drop. You'll find seeps that only exist in the what we'd call mud season, ephemeral wildflower season, before the trees bud. As they're budding, those seeps will still be there, and when they get the full leaf, they'll be sucking up so much groundwater that seep will disappear for the rest of the season. So a lot of times, if you have a lot of seeps in your trail system early in the spring, it's worthwhile tagging them, either geotagging them or flagging them to monitor them, and make a choice. Is that a seep that only exists for 3 weeks each year? 3 weeks when we don't have a lot of trail use? Then that's probably not a priority to fix. But if you have some of those seeps that hang out for 3 months and they become significant mud holes that are causing damage and getting deeper and harder to drain in the summer, and then they become persistent mud holes, those are ones you'd want to prioritize for doing the rock armoring on. Because yeah, you're probably not going to be able to address all of them, and you'll probably find that with your seeps that are out right now, you probably don't need to address all of them.
Now you'll notice, or maybe you've not noticed, maybe some of you have, so far, we've talked all about drainage and creating that positive drainage with the nicks, the grade dip, or reinforcing that area with your rock armoring. something that was super, super popular for a very long time, and you might be tempted to do them, and you can, but this is just move forward with caution, are water bars. Let me step out of the way again, get my floating head from blocking the text. Water bars are great. They can be extremely effective, but they often create more problems than they solve. And that again creates that issue that Rich was just mentioning of you're you're creating more maintenance work in the long term whenever we're already very limited in the time and available staff to do so. So if you're going to install a water bar, this needs to be on a trail that is a difficult trail. Your black diamond, your double black diamond, because they're often steep, you're adding steps, so it's no longer a nice, smooth, approachable trail. You also need to anchor this. And what I mean by anchors is it's a stone or a tree or some other feature on both sides, uphill and downhill of that water bar to keep people on the trail. Otherwise, very much like in this photo here, you can see the water bars are here. We know the trail was there, and over time, people have just started avoiding them. They're walking above the trail now because that's a big step. I don't want to mess with that. Um, and that's some problems that you often see with the water bars. They have to be anchored.
If you are going to make them in West Virginia, use rock. We have a lot of rock. I know we don't have a lot of rock everywhere. We do have some slopes that don't have rock. But if you make them out of rock and they go bad or people avoid them or something happens, it's just more rock that was on that hillside, just in a slightly different place. And 50 years from now, it won't look like an eyesore. If you put log water bars out there with rebar in them, 50 years from now, that wood's gone and that rebar is sticking out of the hillside. So yeah, do the future you a favor, the future trail maintainer that's going to come behind you, and use rock whenever you can if you're going to build that kind of feature.
Yeah, absolutely. And for a long time, the new hotness and the super cool thing to do was this middle photo here. That is a piece of old mine belt. You know, they're malleable. You can ride over them if you're on a bike and they just flex underneath you. Yeah, that'll stop all the water. It's going to be the best thing ever. We can send all of our trails wherever we want. They can be steep. We can see in this photo, it's failed. And it's failed pretty drastically. You have this massive gully appearing in the middle of the trail here, right? It shows that over time, that mine belt, whether it turned into a check dam and water was flowing over top of it, or it lost its rebound over time, water was getting past that and continuing to erode that trail away. Photo on the left is just another example of maybe water going off the water bar, and also I'm sure there's other users kind of reinforcing that too. So working together, they're encouraging the water to avoid it. And then on the right, it looks like steps here. What's happening here is all of those logs are effectively making check dams. So it'll hold the water for an amount of time until it fills up, and then water is going to spill over like a waterfall and start churning up, picking up speed, and taking soil with it. And then it does that multiple times all the way down. And now you not only have a gully, you have gully with giant steps in the middle of it too. Water bars are great, but proceed with caution. Okay, away from drainage and looking into something that happens relatively common and is a good example of just your tread has been damaged. Our trees uprooting. This time of year we get a lot of storms. The soil's already very, very saturated, so you're more likely to see trees uproot this time of year than other times. And sometimes, whenever that happens, the root ball takes part of or all of the trail with you. This is an example of something we fixed up last year at Needles Eye Park down in Oak Hill. And the solution, you can go about this several different ways. This is going to be the easiest solution, is you have that root ball filled with mineral soil, good, usable, workable soil right there. Take the soil from the root ball. You don't have to go harvest elsewhere. It's going to save you a lot of effort for one. And the way they started this project was just knocking dirt off the root ball to fill in that gap that was left, that crater from whenever it originally went up. They then,
All your
go
When
ahead,
all
Rich.
your power is human power, gravity, use gravity to your advantage whenever possible. Anything that's up gradient of you, basically upslope or up in the air above you, is easier to get to where you need it than anything downhill, almost always. So yeah, when you're thinking about your work plan and all you've got is human muscle, think about using gravity to your advantage.
Absolutely. So then they filled the hole. They used the dirt from the root ball to do that, and then also they did need to widen the trail a little bit to get it back into spec. So they just started cutting into the back slope a little bit, just like you would build fresh trail, and all their spoils also went where? Into the hole to fill that hole. And then finally, they cut all the stray roots and like finger roots sticking out from that root ball. So again, there are not claws and stabby things poking out at people as they're making their way down the trail. One
Whenever
final thing I just want to point out, excellent flavor, is they added a little bit of an anchor, just some loose stones that they discovered as they were working on this to create a bit of a gargoyle to encourage people to go to the uphill side of the trail and avoid that hole um, as they're making their way downhill. Rich?
Yeah, whenever you're working on a bench cut trail, there's almost always going to be some back slope nearby that could be not as steep as it is. There's almost always sections that are too steep and aren't stabilizing. If you need fill, that back slope's your great opportunity to get fill. You can lay down a tarp or a bucket at the bottom of the back slope and knock the dirt right into it, and just mine the back slope for that material rather than digging a hole and getting dirt out of a hole is a pain. You got to lift it up out of the hole, take it off the back slope, lay the back slope back. You're going to have sections that are steeper than you want. You can do that as part of it. Secondly, if you're doing any rock that involves, this is definitely with new construction, if your contractor or you are excavating rock during the construction, and you're in a rock poor site, don't throw it away downhill. Save that rock upslope of the trail. If it's up on the back slope, you got little piles of stone perched up there. That way, when you do have seeps that pop up, it's easy to take a wheelbarrow or a candy com along the trail and put those rocks in there. And then you've already got your armoring available on the tread, and you can transport it on the tread to where you need it.
Okay, and let's say maybe the root ball took all of your tread with it, or your trail is just laying in a low-lying spot, or it is severely, severely eroding like this photo here. It's okay to reroute a small portion of your trail. This can be anywhere from 50 feet to 500 plus. Short reroutes, you're not completely rebuilding the entirety of the trail. You're just getting away from that problem area so that way you're back into a sustainable trail after it's done. Um, Go ahead, Rich.
There is a caveat here. Depending upon the land management agency you're working under, they may have restrictions on how far you can reload before they consider that a new section of trail and they have to go through environmental or archaeological compliance. So depending upon if you're in the U.S. Forest Service versus your local county park, there may be differences in your compliance regime for relocating stuff. Um, but yeah, it is oftentimes that, and this is unfortunate because sometimes we get stuck in a trail corridor and are forced to apply band-aids that we know aren't sustainable or long-term. They're just temporary. That's where the check dams come in. That's a desperation move, and that's a corridor that isn't sustainable. Um, but yeah, long term, in most cases, if it's a really unsustainable corridor, you should weigh whether doing the maintenance in it and band-aiding it is worth it. Because if you have to get justification to do environmental compliance to do the relo, you might need to let that situation get to the point where it's very visible to other people and they understand why it needs to relo, and doing perpetual band-aids on it every year may not be getting that point across. You may be working against yourself long term.
So this is, I mean, there's a whole process to this that we're not seeing today, but here's a before and after if you're doing some closure and relocation, is that whenever you're done with the relo, the old trail should not be evident. You can see right here, if you look in the after photo, there's that rock or log that was in the trail. That's a good reference point. So we know that the old trail went right up about this way, but it's really hard to see, right? So as they're doing this, the first step is the old trail. You're going to go in and you're going to loosen up all that compacted dirt, make it more natural and fluffy. And then as you start cutting in the new trail, all your spoils, so we know there was a layer of grass there and maybe some of the shrubs, take that and cover it up, just like you're installing sod. Um, and in our part of the world, we're less likely to have grass to utilize. So you're taking just your leaf debris, your duff. You're going to cover that up with your duff. You might install check dams, just depending on if it's steep. And if you're taking any trees out, if it's a sapling, you can dig it out and maintain its roots. Go replant that. That's awesome. It might root up and continue to grow. Or if you're just like cutting old limbs, old trees down, it sounds silly, but you can take them. We know it's going to die and just plop it in the ground because while the rest of it and kind of the natural process is happening of more leaf litter coming in, that trail corridor is going to be much less obvious that way, and it's not going to be appealing for folks to head in there. And that is maintenance in a nutshell. Some of the easier things you can do, things you can expect to do this time of year. We'd love to open it up to questions now, but I would you want to lay a caveat that it's really difficult for us to solve like a very specific problem you might have right now. But I want to encourage y'all, feel free to email Rich and myself. Send us photos if you can. We'll try to help troubleshoot any maintenance issue that you might have right now. But if we can, try to avoid that sort of thing right now, because it'll be very difficult to talk about as we're just describing the issue.
Thanks so much, Logan and Rich. On the call, thanks everyone for dropping in your name and organization, everything. I see it looks like we have some park staff and volunteers and others. Curious if you all have come across any of these maintenance issues that you've faced on your trails. And feel free to come off mute to and speak up.
This is Lisa from Wetzel County. I've had Logan and Rich have been out here at least once or twice, and we've done a workshop. But we started a new section of trail, and we had a wet spot that is just the wet spot from you know where. Over the winter, though, a trail or a tree uprooted right in that exact spot. So now we have an uprooted tree and a mud hole and all in the same place. So Monday we have our first work day of the year, and so that was good. I think we've talked about that before, but that's always good to hear that information again, to just to remind you to the
Rob,
best way to take care of that.
yeah, if you had both the wet area and then you had the tree destabilized in that same area, you've probably got you've got a lot of groundwater in there. I wouldn't be surprised if you have a rock or a clay lens underneath that, that's concentrating that water that's coming down through the groundwater, and for some reason it's getting uh, concentrated in that location. But that tree coming down, that sounds like you had some destabilized soil there as well. And I know that property's got some issues with some unstable soils. Um,
Sure.
yeah, I would make sure that where that place is, make sure it's well dipped, and then rock armor that. And that's without looking at it. My best guess would be some pitching in there because it definitely sounds like you got a lot of groundwater. So pitching and making sure you've got a lot of gaps in the bottom of the pitching.
In regards to the pitching, and you mentioned a technique of having the stone pitching and then placing like a cap of soil on top to maintain maybe that like same experience.
That's generally where we're not having the water flow through as much. Um, you can do that dirt on top, but then you want your pitching to be really deep, like
Got it.
12
Okay,
or
that's what I was
more.
asking is like, is it
Yeah.
as effective or like when would you do that versus another time?
Generally, you're doing that when you've got a situation like you're crossing a wetter area that just the soil's just not going to withstand it because it's all mucky or poorly drained through the whole thing. So you're doing basically a stone causeway with the pitching, and then you're doing a dirt cap on top. Or sometimes that pitching's hidden under the ground. It's you're basically creating a foundation with it under the tread. So your groundwater flows, it doesn't have to have open pores. It's flowing through the dirt anyway. It'll keep flowing through dirt that's between the rocks. It just won't do it as fast because there's not quite as much openings in there. The rocks take up some of the space, but you could have that, and then you've got that dirt cap on top. So one, the dirt cap hides it. You've got that stone foundation. Hopefully, some of the groundwater is going through it. If it gets to the point where it's saturated on top, that soil can still get saturated. It's going to get a little muddy, but the mud's only going to get so deep because it's going to get pushed down into the rock. and the rock's going to come up and the rock's going to act as like a break point where the tires or feet can't go any further into the ground. So if it gets really wet, it'll get a little rockier, but it's only the top of the rocks that really get exposed. That's actually, I wish we had the picture I took 2 years later from this exact same site where you can't see that it just looks like a dirt trail a foot wide in the middle of this. There's little vegetation growing up on the sides, and there's just a few rocks sticking up from the surface. You can't see all this rock underneath. And in this situation specifically in the Wissahickon Park, there was a lot of equestrian use and it was stable use. And a lot of those equestrians were not, and their horses were not well adapted to the rock. And so they would try and go around the rock. So like we capped this all with dirt so they wouldn't know the rock was there.
I see. I see. So in the case that you're capping it, is there any like intermediate layer? Is it just the stone pitching and then you put that soil right on top, or you like
Just a
put
couple of inches of soil on top of it. Not too worried. If it's going to get wet, it's going to squish and then the rock's going to pop up. And it's only going to be muddy temporarily until it gets pushed down. If it doesn't get wet, that soil's probably going to stay. You're going to get some natural weathering and weathering from use. So some of the rock will become exposed, but a lot of it'll stay there.
in the case that there is a lot of flow with the pitching and it is picking up sediment over time, are there any like best practices to like remove that sediment to continue that consistent flow, or you just need to rebuild for like bigger
If you
porous
if you if
sections?
you've got a if you've got flow that's on the surface that's heavy enough that it's stripping all the soil off this pitching, you've got some decent concentrated flow there. And in that case, the issue is if you want to prevent sedimentation long term, if you've got that much flow and you can see that from the beginning, I wouldn't recommend in putting the soil on there. But sometimes you don't know that till there's a storm event. And this is where having some riprap downstream of that pitching that's going to create turbulence, that's going to settle water out. One, prevent it from head cutting in. Also, you may consider if you're in an area, you're in a urban stream valley park, like say where the Wissahickon is, you may create check dams in the stream itself further down, just dropping logs into the, not in the stream. And this is not a stream, it's just a drainage. We don't have signs in this one of defined year-round flow. But you've got an ephemeral stream with occasional flow. You may do some log check dams or leaf check dams further down the drainage to help capture any sediment. We generally do that with most trail crossings. We're going to put extra leafy debris or woody debris down in the drainage channel down below that. If we don't see, there's not year-round flow, but there's a defined channel. We'll use organic material to create basically a pocket that any sediment that does get released from the trail gets held up there and settles into the leaves at that point. Our biggest concern with sedimentation is anytime we're really close to quality aquatic habitat. So our concern about erosion or sedimentation loss at the top of a mountaintop when we're thousands of feet from any stream is not going to be nearly as much. Whereas if we're about to cross the tributary of a blue ribbon trout stream, and that tributary goes into that breeding habitat just downstream, we're going to be much more cautious about sediment loss, do a lot more leaf mulching, consider check dams in our tributaries down or just below our crossings to make sure we don't get any sediment release into that, especially salmonoid habitat. That's really, really sediment sensitive.
And do you all do trainings on this? And do you have any trainings in 2026 on this type of this work?
We sure do. But first, just want to point out this slide I went to. This is an example of that riprap on the downhill side of your armoring to prevent any erosion happening once it gets through that rock. Yes, we do workshops just on rock armor. We're doing, I believe right now we have two this year. The first one is April 18th at Kanawha State Forest. That's going to happen from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. It is currently live on the website. All the other trainings, we're just waiting on a few other dates to solidify, and then we're going to release them all at the same time. So keep checking back for those. But we will do a rock armor clinic in the Cranberry area of the Mon National Forest in this fall. That date is not yet solidified, but keep checking back, and we'd love to see you all there.